Welcome to an introduction to accounting, brought to you by Parkbench Tutors and narrated by David Hopcroft. In this podcast for business studies, we're going to continue our work on ratios, and we are going to look at the efficiency ratios again, and this particular podcast will concentrate on inventory turnover. There are a number of questions that we could ask about inventory, but first of all let's clear up one small point, and that is that the term inventory, although used widely around the world, is referred to as stock in the UK. Sometimes the English just have to be different. So, how much inventory do we have at any point during the year? How many times is the inventory turned over or moved in a year? And then possibly quite important for some businesses, how long does an item remain in inventory during the year? Generally, we're going to use the term inventory as a whole for the calculation of the last figure. So the average inventory, how much inventory we have at any one point over the year, we can obtain this by simply taking the opening inventory and the closing inventory and divide by 2. And those figures we can obtain from the income statement because they're the ones that are used when we determine the cost of the goods sold. Secondly, the inventory turnover in the year. Having found the average inventory, if we divide the cost of goods sold by the average inventory, then we get what we call the inventory turnover in the year. And for a retail business, that figure is particularly important, because you want to keep inventory turning over, so we want a pretty large number for this. Why? Because inventory, if it's left on the shelves, isn't selling, and if it's not selling, then quite clearly we're not making a profit. So, how long is the inventory being held? Once we've got the inventory turnover period, if we divide that into 365, number of days in a year, then we can get the number of days that inventory is held. And clearly the smaller the figure the better. If inventory is moving fast, then we're doing well because we're selling fast. Let's go back to something we mentioned in an earlier podcast, the case of Asteroid Electrical, which was struggling to stay afloat. They're a retail outlet for electrical items such as televisions, washing machines, stoves, hair dryers, all that sort of thing. And we're going to look at their income statement and their statement of financial position, that is their balance sheet. So here we are. Here are our details for Asteroid Electrical. And the first thing you can notice then is opening inventory 15,000. This is in the income statement. Closing inventory 26,000. That's pretty high for inventory, particularly when you immediately note that the figures, here we are, for the cost of goods sold are 96,000. So we'll start with that. The opening inventory plus the closing inventory divided by 2 gives us a figure of 20,500 for the average inventory. In other words, the value of the average inventory is £20,500. The inventory turnover, cost of goods sold by average inventory held, that figure comes up to 4.68, so less than 5. The inventory is only being turned over about every 2 months, not even that. The inventory turnover period, 365 divided by the inventory turnover, gives us a figure of 77.94 days. In other words, and here's the significant part, any item is probably in the store for over 2 months before it gets sold. Now, don't jump to too many conclusions, because obviously what we are selling does make a difference. So if Graham Kay is selling refrigerators, then he doesn't want those on the shop floor taking space up for very long. He wants to turn those over pretty quick. Annabelle Davis might not worry quite so much about selling BMW cars. She might expect those to stay on the forecourt perhaps for slightly longer. Now Bob the Builder, if he's building and selling houses, he may expect his, particularly in today's housing climate, he might expect those to be on the market for some considerable time. So that inventory turnover figure, it does depend which business we are looking at. So let's take something else. Stack and Shift, a retail outlet for groceries and provisions. Going to look at their trading figures for the year, and we'll determine inventory turnover. Here we are. Here are our trading figures. So opening inventory 18,000, closing inventory 26,000. Still high figures it seems for inventory, but then we look at cost of goods sold, 382,450. You can see we're dealing now with a much larger figure. So average inventory is 22,000, which by itself doesn't tell us a great deal. But the inventory turnover, the cost of goods sold divided by the average inventory, a figure of 17.38. So compared to Asteroid Electrical, we see inventory is shifting faster. So how much faster? You remember Asteroid Electrical, then the figure we got for inventory turnover period was something like 78 days. Here, the inventory turnover period, 365 divided by 17.38, 21 days. Moving much faster obviously than the electrical store. So inventory is in the store for 3 weeks on average. Mind you, even this might be considered high for a retailer of groceries, because obviously some inventory is going to be on the shelves so much longer than others, but you would expect it to have quite a few items where the turnover period would be a matter of less than a week. But it is certainly much better than Asteroid Electricals. Just before we finish the podcast, you might think of what you think is a suitable inventory turnover period for some of the following. If you were a photographer, what would you expect? If you were a greengrocer, what would you expect the turnover period to be? You have to think here, of course, of how long your inventory actually lasts. If you're a farmer selling maize or corn, well, how many times a year are you actually going to have inventory to sell? If you're a bakery, how long does the product last? If you're a shipbuilder, can you afford to have inventory at all, or do you have to build to order all the time? This ends our short podcast on inventory, brought to you by Parkbench Tutors and narrated by David Hopcroft. Thank you for watching and for listening. We wish you success in your studies. For more information about Parkbench Tutors, you may find us on Facebook. Just look for Parkbench Tutors. Thank you.